Good morning. I'd like to call to order the September 2nd, 2020 meeting of the State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Ms. DeLissa.
Present.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest. Dr. Ernest, I see you there.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Freitas.
Present.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Superintendent McCormick.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Rensselaer.
Here.
And Chairman Watts.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda from the August 12th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Statement of the chair. I do just want to thank schools again as we get deeper into this school year. I know everything that you're going through, and please know that we appreciate it, and the job that you're doing for boys and girls is absolutely amazing. Keep up the great work, and we're doing everything we can to support you. Board member comments and reports. Any comments or reports? Seeing none, moving on to consent agenda. We have a latchkey waiver for East Noble, South Ripley, East Gibson, North Putnam, Northwestern, and DeKalb County. Common School Fund for Lawrence Township. Praxis cut scores. Our appointment to the Legislative Task Force to review standards. Wilmington Islamic School Freeway Contract Amendment and Formative Assessment Grant Distribution. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? So ordered. New business, rule modification. As we get into this, I do want to thank Governor Holcomb for his leadership on this. I know how much work and how many long hours. So, along with state board staff and House and Senate leadership, I know that I appreciate it. Districts do also. Are there any comments on rule modification? Brian, who's going to present on this?
BJ, this is Chad. I will present on this.
Okay, you are up, sir.
Okay, so what the board should have in front of it today is a memo from me to all the board members with a recommendation. And the recommendation is that the board direct the board's executive director, in this case it would be Brian, to modify its existing rule. In particular, it's Rule 511 IAC 1-3. And the purpose of modifying it is to ultimately define virtual instruction. Under the executive order 2005 issued by Governor Holcomb, the authority to modify rules lies with Brian. However, we wanted the board to see this rule before doing it, given the importance that the rule is going to have. And so with that, I will walk through some of the modifications step by step. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to let me know. So moving on to page 2 of the document, which is page 1 of the rule modification, we see a modification to the definition of average daily membership. The sole purpose of making this modification is to ensure that the rules definition of ADM lines up to the current statutory definition of ADM. This rule has not been updated in quite some time. So the modification would ensure that we do have a statutory and rule match. And the reason this is important is because the term ADM is going to be used a number of times throughout this rule. And so we want to make sure it all lines up and is accurate. Page 3 of the document in front of you, so this is page 2 of the rule modification, begins with some general cleanup language, the purpose of which is to eliminate any confusion or ambiguity that might be caused by language that is otherwise out of date and no longer relevant. And so this is very simple language, very simple cleanup language, and again, is just meant to avoid confusion. Moving on to page 4 of the document, or page 3 of the rule modification, This is where the real meat of the modification lies. This is where the operative language lies, and I'll walk through it. But essentially, what we've done here is for purposes of determining school corporations' basic tuition support using the fall count of ADM, which I will note will remain September 18th, 2020, as originally approved by the board back in April. But for purposes of calculating a school's basic tuition support using that fall count of ADM, we have defined virtual instruction to mean instruction that is provided in an interactive learning environment created through technology in which the student is separated from a teacher by time or space or both. And the key here is that unless that instruction is being provided to a student that meets the following requirements. Those requirements essentially yield the following result, is that if a student was enrolled in a brick and mortar school last year, they will continue to generate 100% of the funding they would otherwise generate for their school corporation, regardless of how they're receiving their instruction on count day this year. If a student was receiving virtual instruction last year and they are not receiving in-person instruction as of this year's count date in the fall, or in other words, if the student is merely continuing on with their virtual instruction that they were receiving last year, they will generate 85% of the funding otherwise available to their corporation. And so all of this is the purpose of all of this is to get to 100% funding, just as the governor has outlined in his request to the board when he originally asked the board to look at moving the ADM count date. It's to generate 100% of funding for those students who are receiving instruction in a manner that is not typically delivered in a brick and mortar school setting due to COVID-19. So with that, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions or the board members would like additional explanation.
Chad, before we get into questions, I do, and I know that lots of people worked on this, but I do know the hours that you and Brian both put in on this. So thank you very much for that. You've gone above and beyond here.
Move to approve the resolution.
Chad, I have a question. This is
Yes,
Jennifer.
please.
My question lies with, can you explain for our listeners why that second count wasn't addressed? And I know superintendents have questions about that because of long-term budgeting and bargaining.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason for focusing on the fall count of ADM as opposed to the entire school year lies in the board's authority. The board is currently deriving its authority from an executive order, which will remain in effect for the duration of the public health emergency. And so for the board to go beyond what we know is the public health emergency, I think one would be inappropriate, and two, we want to leave the option open. So the whole goal of this is that, if COVID were, if there were a vaccine tomorrow, that students would be able to return in person in a safe environment. And so we want to leave the option open and be able to address the second count date closer to that count date should the public health emergency exist. So it's twofold. We want to be able to check the conditions on the ground before we make a decision, before we have to. And then two, it's really important that the board stay within its authority, and its authority in this case is limited to the public health emergency, which will remain with us during the spring or the fall count date, in September. But we do not know whether it will be here for the February count date.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments by board members?
BJ,
Yes, sir.
which one of us?
Let's go.
Yeah, go
Bob
ahead.
and Pete.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, sorry, Pete. I hope that so this is a comment, but I feel pretty strongly about this based on some of the public comment that we've gotten and recognizing some of that. While I realize right now it would be beyond our authority to address some of the things that have been discussed in the public comment, I think that what we have certainly found, particularly for some of us who have been in the virtual world for some time, is that now I think everybody realizes that the virtual education option is a short-term solution for some and a long-term solution for all, right? And I think we need to remember that. And it's too bad that we really hadn't embraced virtual education to the extent that we could have to have been ready for a pandemic. But that's a whole nother discussion. But then I hope that this becomes, and my reason for the comment is, I hope this becomes a part of a larger conversation about all of this so that we can get the funding aligned and be right and fair for all students, regardless of which avenue they're using for virtual education. So thanks. I just felt like I needed to make that comment based on particularly some of the public comments that we've gotten as late, to recognize that I certainly agree with many of those comments that have been made about funding. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, sir. Pete?
Yeah, and this comment is may sound like it's in conflict with what Byron said. It's not. I totally agree. For those that have chosen the long-term option of virtual, I support that and continue to encourage us to explore being flexible with how we deliver instruction. But you know, for the vast majority of cases, the best place for kids to learn is in person. That's why Hoosier taxpayers have spent the billions that we have on brick and mortar and maintaining that infrastructure. You know, this action that we're voting on, in effect, we're doing a workaround to an existing statute that disincentivizes the virtual instruction. But that action notwithstanding, if it passes, my hope is that schools will continue to seek to provide in-person instruction whenever it's possible. And obviously, I say that fully aware of all the challenges involved with that, and everything has to be done in collaboration with state and local health officials. But by and large, kids are safe in the classroom. They're the least vulnerable population to COVID-19. That being said, we've got to be vigilant with all the masking and social distancing precautions to protect older faculty members and older family members. But wherever it can be safely done, we should continue to have in-person instruction as our goal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Can we just have a
Hold on, we have a
second?
motion by
Yeah.
Motion.
Nate. I don't know if we have a second yet.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Ms. DeLosa,
I agree.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas, Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Rentschler,
Yes.
Chairman Watts.
Yes.
Recommendation passes 11-0. We will have Brian sign off and get that posted immediately after the meeting ends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have a resolution honoring the service of Tony Walker. I will read that if you don't mind. Whereas Mr. Tony Walker has twice served with distinction as a member of the Indiana State Board of Education, representing the 1st Congressional District. Whereas Mr. Walker was most recently appointed by Governor Eric J. Holcomb in 2017 to serve on the board. Whereas Mr. Walker served on the board executive committee as secretary. Whereas Mr. Walker ensured the needs of the 1st Congressional District schools were brought to the attention of the board. Whereas Mr. Walker has been a tireless advocate for students, not just in the 1st Congressional District, but around the state. And whereas Mr. Walker is well respected by his fellow board members and colleagues in the education community for his dedication to improving education outcomes for all students across Indiana. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Indiana State Board of Education wish to express their deepest appreciation to Mr. Walker for his exemplary service to the board, to recognize him for his contributions as a board member, to acknowledge his distinguished leadership on the board, and to thank him for his dedication to Indiana schools, and most importantly, for his dedication to Indiana students. I certainly had the privilege of serving with Tony, as did many of you, and we certainly want to recognize his service. A lot of times this is a thankless job. So
Move to approve.
So we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Ms. DeLosa,
Yes.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Enthusiastically, yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Also an enthusiastic aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Rensselaer,
Yes.
and Chairman Watts.
Yes.
Resolution has been adopted by the board. Thank you.
With anything else for the good of the cause here? I do look forward, we will be in person in October, and I look forward to seeing everyone then. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We'll end the second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 We stand adjourned. Thank you, folks.